hold that opinion, let alone even take it, seriously. It just seems like it's just right off the rails. And that's a pretty pessimistic viewpoint, I think.
Yes, I know what you mean. I'd like to see this quantified. I do agree with you. There's been a slide in the civility of political discourse. I do agree with that. I'd like to see somebody try to quantify it. I actually looked for some quantification of that for my book, and I couldn't find anybody. But there must be somebody, must be some political science researcher looking for that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know really why it is. I'm against it myself, and I've even got into trouble. I wrote an article for the American Conservative a few months ago, taking issue with the louder kind of conservative radio talk show hosts. American Conservative, they put it was the cover story, and they put a picture of Rush Limbaugh as a little baby in a baby carriage, yelling, like waving his arms like a baby. And I got into quite a lot of trouble with that, and a lot of people emailed in to say, I'm not going to read your stuff anymore if you're against Rush Limbaugh. But yeah, there has been a real coarsening. And when conservatives talk about this amongst ourselves, the usual thing that comes back, if you say that, is, yeah, but if you go back to the 50s or the 60s when there was all this bipartisanship and everybody worked together, it didn't have the vitality, it didn't have the intellectual quality, it didn't have the fizz and the intellectual excitement that today's politics has. People say this to me. And I say, well, you can have an intellectual excitement without screaming at each other, surely. But perhaps you can't. I don't know the reason for it. I absolutely agree with you. I don't know the reason for it. And it certainly is on both sides. I mean, for every Rush Limbaugh, there's an Al Franken. I can't think of any other names in that context, but yeah. Okay. Well, if no one has any more questions, perhaps Alan would like to come and throw darts at me.
Not really.
Oh.
Where do you want?
I think we're to sit over here. Do we have...
I want to thank John for, now that I've spent the weekend with this book, and I'm nearly suicidal. I want to thank you because now I feel like I'm rededicating myself to liberalism after reading this, so I really appreciate that very much.
I'd like to thank Alan for doing this. It's extremely decent of him.
I'm doing it at a Jewish guilt. We had John often does my radio show, and we had him booked on a Friday night, and there was no John. And it turns out the car didn't show up, and he had reserved a Friday night, so he's always been very good to me, and actually my real plan was to not be here and just say the car didn't show up. But unfortunately it did, so here we are.
I have a friend called Paul Gottfried, who's a minor figure in conservative writing. He writes sort of intellectual conservative stuff, rather gloomy. And he said on one of his book tours for one of his books that people kept asking him, why don't you give out suicide razors with these books? And I said that's good. Maybe maybe we'll do that as a
How do you want to do this? You want me to ask
marketing ploy. Yeah, just hit me.
All right. Well, my pleasure.
Verbally.
First of all, John was on my... the press you got on the internet based on being my radio show the other night? It was all over the net. It's that you're kind of behind the times. This is the thing you plug in. It's called a computer. And John, he has a part in the book where he says the case against female suffrage. And I questioned John about that, and Think Progress, Center for American Progress, picked up on it. Almost every liberal website picked up on it. I may have helped you sell some books against my better judgment. And so...
There is no bad publicity.
That's what I thought. So, and they spelled your name right. But the idea that you actually believe that the world would be better, it's the beginning of Chapter 5. He's following along here. You think the world, and you talk about the feminization of America like that's a bad thing. It seems awfully sexist. And the case against, you can't get more sexist than the case against female suffrage. We would be a better world if women didn't have the vote.
Well,
that would be a yes or no question.
All right, I'll take it in that spirit. But now look, female suffrage. I think I can truthfully say that I haven't spent 5 minutes of my life, probably not even 5 seconds, trying to form an opinion about female suffrage.
When you write a book and one of the headlines is "The Case Against It," I would guess you have an opinion.
It's not a thing you have an opinion. It's like having an opinion about whether we should bring back the feudal system, you know? It's not a thing anybody has an opinion about. Female suffrage is not going away.
So what were you thinking when you wrote The Case Against Female Suffrage?
I was making the point, as I mentioned, this is the chapter on sex, and as I said, the thread of that chapter is that women are more inclined to socialism and to big government solutions than men are. And
that's why they're smarter than we are.
And therefore, that a feminization of society will be bad for conservatives. Alan, I don't recall the exact exchange, but Alan on his radio show last week asked me if I was then against female suffrage, which I took as a historical hypothetical. I mean, it's, you know, I'm a freelance writer scratching away in my attic. I'm not going to overthrow, excuse me, the what was it, the 19th Amendment in 1920 or the 20th Amendment in 1919? I can never remember. But, you know, female suffrage is not going anywhere. But as a historical hypothetical, if you ask me, as Alan indeed just did ask me, whether as a hypothetical we might have had better government the last 90 years if women had not had the vote, that's an interesting hypothetical, and I think I could answer that with, yeah, we might have had, yeah.
Well, you were actually more specific than me. You said, and when I said, would we be better if women didn't vote, you'd say yes. It was basically as simple as that. And
isn't that what I just said?
Well, you said it in a very long roundabout kind of, a little bit of buffer there, but
there is actually a contrary case, although it's much too complicated for a liberal to understand.
Talk slowly.
Actually, if you look up the numbers, women voted preferentially Republican up to, I think it was 1964. There was a crossover point. I think it was Goldwater who crossed them over. And after that, they voted preferentially Democrat. But that's a matter of party affiliation. That's not so much conservative liberal. There were a lot of conservative Democrats around in 1964. I'm sure Alan knows the roll calls on the 1964 Federal Civil Rights Act.
I was studying that on the way over here today.
Okay, good.
All right, a couple other things. You say up here, this is actually deeper into the book. You say up to a point, the more depressed and maladjusted you are, the more likely it is that you're seeing things right with minimal bias. You touched on this earlier. So you're making the case for being depressed and maladjusted.
Yes.
That is sickening. Sad. I mean, it's horrifying.
Well, no, I'm not horrified by it. Let me tell you, I'm an empiricist. I had a scientific and mathematical training. In fact, I've written a couple of math books, which you might find on the shelves here. And when questions like this about human nature, when they arise, I go to the science. I look to see what people have turned up and what people have uncovered. And this is, unfortunately, a thing that people have uncovered. As I mentioned, just this weekend, I saw another piece reinforcing the same point, that, and it's a bit of a puzzle, because depression, you'd think that depression would be a Darwinian no-no. You think that depressives would be purged out of the gene pool. You know, why are they still here? Why are there so many of them? And the answer seems to be, and psychologists and geneticists are looking into this, and they're coming up with papers like the one I mentioned, the answer seems to be that being of a melancholy and depressive temperament gives you a kind of an edge. And the edge it gives you is that you see things more clearly. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning. The heart of fools is in the house of mirth.
So that look scares me. Are you raising your kids to be depressives?
You don't really have a choice about it. I hope I'm raising them to have low expectations of their fellow human beings.
I see. That's very exciting. Now, you also say, I'm just skipping around here because obviously time is limited, but you have here the case you mentioned, you do have a chapter on education, and you write, if the authorities were to enforce compulsory education to age 12 and then leave citizens free to purchase as much or as little further schooling or training as they wanted with a loan or voucher system, we might be no worse off than we are. So you would favor education at the age of 12, and then just people don't want to go beyond that, that's fine. You would not have compulsory education beyond the age of 12.
I think it might work, yeah. I'm tentative about it, as you read. But
wouldn't that create a dumber society? And probably more conservative.
I'm going to restrain the impulse to say, how could it? No, not necessarily. No, it would not necessarily create a dumber society. Millions of American school kids learn nothing useful after the age of 12. I'm sure that's a true statement.
So you would just end education at 12, and that would be your policy.
Well, end publicly funded education, but have a marketplace for as much education as people wanted.
Well, yeah, I mean, that'd be free market for education.
Yeah.
But you're not going to force kids to go through high school.
No.
So you're done at 12, that's it. Maybe you know half the alphabet and you're finished.
I think it could work.
We are doomed. We really are doomed. Do you have any liberal points of view?
I have a few on things like wealth inequality. I think you can have too much wealth inequality in a society. I think we probably do have too much, which is a thing I argue with my fellow conservatives about a lot. And and I'm irreligious, which usually travels with religion, with liberalism. Although there's a little cadre of irreligious conservatives. We founded a website called Secular Right. So yeah, in some ways I'm off the conservative reservation, but then conservatives are independent thinkers. We don't follow the herd. We machete our own way through the jungle.
The immigration, another chapter, immigration invading the world. You have a chapter, and you say there may be a case for immigration from Somalia, Iraq, and the Dominican Republic, but the Nobel Prize just doesn't make it. In fact, it rather argues against it. So you're making the historical conservative argument, the Pat Buchanan argument, that immigration from Europe was okay. But once you get people from other countries that may not be socialized as we are, look like we are, different skin color perhaps, it's not as acceptable in terms of where you want America to be going.
Well, I think probably where you and I, the core point here where you and I would disagree is on population quality. Human populations, and again, I say I'm an empiricist. I try to look at the science of the thing. Human populations have different characteristics. They have abilities are differently distributed. The differences are statistical. The differences between populations are statistical and they're slight. But when you have big numbers of people, they matter. And I think that Nobel Prize list, where is the Nobel Prize list? Hold on. 199. Excuse me. Excuse me just a moment. I'm trying to find my Nobel Prize list.
The immigration chapter starts on...
199, yeah. Okay, just checking. I'll just read you out. Just checking the handy Wikipedia list of Nobel Prize winners by citizenship and nation of origin.
We all can believe Wikipedia.
This is in response to a claim that immigration has been good for our Nobel Prize list. I see that of the 17 American winners for the years 2005 to 2007, 4 are immigrants. They came from Russia, Italy, England, and Germany. So I'm confounding this guy's argument. He says immigration to court is good for bumping up your Nobel Prize winners. And I'm saying, well, immigration from Russia, England, Italy, and Germany is, but it is not proven that immigration from anywhere else is.
Well, immigration, and, you know, you have a very small percentage of people who are Nobel Prize winners. And to simply use that as the benchmark by which you judge whether or not we should have immigration from X country or Y country seems an awfully small sample. And it sounds racist to say these countries but not these countries, doesn't it?
Probably. But again, to the first point, I'm refuting a point that Robert Putnam made. I'm refuting his point. I'm not pulling this out of thin air. As to whether it's racist, I'm not I can
I'm not suggesting